at the same time that I was in the hospital with my brain tumor, there was another boy my same age with literally the same brain tumor. His name was John. And here you have these two kids, same age, same tumor, this rare type of tumor. And at the end of the day, John did not get to come home from the hospital. My mom would stay in touch a little bit with his mother. And I remember on my 14th anniversary of when I had went blind, I was able through Facebook to find John's mom, and I got to meet her. I didn't know she would want to meet me, but I was grateful that she did. And John is somebody who I never met, but yet I can't help sometimes but think that I get to live for us both. If some days are maybe a little bit hard, I have to think that, yeah, but I got somebody else on my back. Somebody else who didn't get to go home, who didn't get to become best friends with his parents, who didn't get to be here 20 years later. And for myself, I always just kind of keep that in the back of my mind.
Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. If you're on YouTube, I hope you're enjoying the enhanced view. I got a new office set up right now. It's coming together. Just want to say, another thank you to you all. We are making strides as a podcast, and it's all because of you, the listeners. If you haven't already, please, if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, be sure to hit subscribe wherever you're getting your podcast from. Lastly, check out the show notes. There's a discount code if you want to pick up your copy of Audacious or Break Barriers. Check it out. People have been taking advantage of it, and I just want to say thank you all for your continuous support. Today's guest probably needs no introduction, and you're going to understand why once we're done with this episode. But I can't wait to dive right in. Today's guest is Kevin Lowe. He's a remarkable entrepreneur, who's taken the world by storm. Despite the seemingly insurmountable challenge of losing his eyesight in 2003, Kevin has risen to success as a purpose-driven life coach and the engaging host of the popular podcast, Grit, Grace, and Inspiration. Kevin, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, man, I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course, man. And so, I'm going to call it out right from the front. I never had an experience like I had with you. This is the first time for the listeners that I had to literally cut off a guest mid-interview and say, this isn't doing you justice. And so we actually recorded a 45-minute segment last week that I completely scratched up and said, no, this doesn't do you justice, Kevin. We need to do this all over again because you deserve to be heard, and you deserve to have this platform done right for you. And so here we are today. I'm grateful for you making the time for me. And I want to dive right in because your story has a lot to unfold. So you lost your eyesight at 17. Is that correct?
That is, yes.
Tell us exactly what went down.
So I said I was 17 years old. At the time I was in my junior year of high school. So this was back in 2003. I literally had just begun my junior year of high school. Life was going great for a kid. I mean, I had my dream truck that I got in the year before when I turned 16. Had a finally awesome group of friends. And I mean, life was going amazing. And I always say it's kind of like the scene in the movie is, at some point something's about to happen because it's going too well. And for me, that came with my mom and my grandmother, my Nana, finally getting tired of what the pediatrician had been telling us for a long time about kind of blowing off all these symptoms I was having that we kept talking about, like migraine headaches every single day. I drank, my mom told the doctor, I drank more than any human you would ever see. all these things. And he just kept, blowing it off, saying, don't worry about it. He's a late bloomer. I hadn't hit my growth spurt. I hadn't gone through puberty, all of that. And I'm 17 years old. So finally, my mom and grandmother would take charge and they would get me in with a new doctor, a family doctor. And that would be the first domino to fall because that doctor would pull my mom out into the hallway and tell her that he didn't know what was wrong, but something was definitely not right. And he sent us right away to a specialist, an endocrinologist, to figure out what was going on. And I remember sitting in the office of the endocrinologist on our very first appointment, and I remember him just plainly saying, he's like, "Well, I expect that you have a brain tumor." And it was like, what? And really like a moment of total disbelief of, what is this guy talking about, a brain tumor? But lo and behold, my mom would get the call on a Friday evening. She was actually on her way to meet me and my stepdad and stepbrother down at our boat. We were heading up the Intercoastal Waterway up to St. Augustine, Florida for the weekend. And she was in the car and she got a call from the doctor. And he asked if she was driving, which she said yes. To which he asked if she could please pull over, which she did. And he gave her the news that the results of the MRI had come in and it was worse than he ever expected. We would come to find out that I had a plum-sized, non-cancerous brain tumor right in the center of my head. It had completely encased my pituitary gland, was in the crosshairs of the optic nerve, and had begun pressing against my carotid artery. And they literally gave me only 6 months to live if this tumor was not removed. And so things really sped up from that point forward. I would end up going into the operating room at Arnold Palmer Children's Hospital in Orlando, Florida, on the morning of October 28th, 2003, with the whole idea that this was a speed bump. I was assured that we would have the surgery. They would go in, remove the tumor, said that I'd be back to school in about 3 to 4 weeks. No big deal. As dramatic as it sounded, that was the whole thing, and that was my mindset going into surgery. And then everything changed. The doctor came out of the very long surgery, came out to my family to tell them that everything went great, that he was able to remove the tumor. And he said everything was great. And everything didn't go great though. I would end up remaining in the ICU for the next 2 weeks. I have no memory whatsoever after being taken to the operating room on that morning of the 28th. I would not end up going home until I believe November 13th. And it was approximately just maybe a day or two after the surgery when they found out the news. It was my mom was in the room with the leading nurse. And apparently the nurse was trying to get me to stop pulling off the little pulse ox thing that they put on your finger or toe. And apparently, as my mom said, that he said to me, he's like, "Kevin, do you see this? Like, stop taking this off your toe." And I guess there was maybe a blinking red light on the little pulse ox. And he was asking, "Kevin, do you see this red light?" And to which I responded, "No, I don't see anything." At that moment, he looked at my mom looked at him. He went over, he hit the light switch on and off, on and off. "Kevin, do you see this light? Do you see this?" To which I responded, no, it's just black. It's just black. And that is when it was discovered that I was left completely blind. As I said, it was never expected, not in a million years. Matter of fact, prior to surgery, when the surgeon went over all the possible risks involved, it was on the list, but it was literally the last thing. It was a 1% possibility. It was never even considered. And yet here I was left completely blind at
Did it
17
hit
years
you?
old.
Did it hit you when he asked you about the light flickering? Did you realize, "Oh my god, I'm blind," at that point, or did it not register yet?
Yeah, so I have, like I said, no memory of that time. The whole time in the hospital, I have no memory whatsoever. And so my memory doesn't actually return until weeks after returning home. And so that story is from my mom. And my mom says that the whole time in the hospital, that she always says that I never freaked out. I never, freaked out about not being able to see. And I think it was because prior to surgery, we had been told by another family that we had met with that their son had had the same type of surgery, and they had given us a heads up that sometimes that there's so much swelling and stuff that you might not be able to see for a little bit afterwards. And so my mom thinks it was maybe because of that I never freaked out. But yeah, I never did. Um,
Well,
of course,
I had a
yeah.
similar surgery when I was 13,
Oh wow.
um, and for me, similar to you, they found a golf ball size mass, it was benign. But I do remember, and I talked, a lot about what it was like in the recovery room after, um, and I don't know what kind of drugs they gave you afterwards, but they gave me a ton of morphine, and so morphine morphine does numb a lot, and it does send your mind to places, um, you know that kind of distracts you from what's going on in reality. So I don't know what kind of drugs you maybe were taking at that point in recovery, but I
Yeah.
do recall that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they my family said that I was literally just like I turned into the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, yeah,
Apparently my sodium levels were all out of whack, and so I mean there's stories of me picking my dad up by the throat and lifting him off the ground, or pulling my grandmother over top of me, to then like crazy stories of me like using my grandmother's finger as a toothbrush, to just all these crazy stories that it seems like every anniversary, me and the family, it seems like always bring up these memories. And as horrible as a time as it was, I mean, when we look back on it, there were so many funny stories that they have to tell about trying to take care of me and all my craziness. So
yeah. I joked around. I thought my dad, when he came into the room, I thought he was Bob Barker, and I thought I was on The Price is Right. Uh, that's where it's crazy that post-surgery, experience, and we make light of it because we were in the patient's chair at the time,
yes.
and I think it's really all we can do, in
Oh,
those
exactly.
situations. Um, Kevin, do you remember the last thing that you saw?
Yeah, it was literally the faces of my mom and dad. They had went with me, like my whole big family was at the hospital the night before surgery that morning, but it was my mom and dad who walked back with me. They followed me in the hospital bed, and man, I always say, dude, that if I knew then what I know now, I don't know that I could have allowed them to push me through those doors and to stop being able to just look at their faces, because to this day, some over 20 years later, it's still the fact that I can't see my own family that sometimes really bothers me the most.
Are you still very close with both your parents?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There have been so many blessings that have come out of what happened to me, and really what happened to a family. And one of those blessings are is that I literally got to become best friends with my parents, and even with my grandparents,
I'm gonna ask
which
you a
is
difficult
awesome.
question. I'm gonna ask you a difficult question. For those of us that have our eyesight, this has been 20 years for you now, right? And when I think about seeing my parents over the last 20 years, naturally, there's some aging that goes into it. There's just life experiences, you see them going through things that at that point in life, you didn't know much about. From your lens, um, and maybe lens is not the right word there, so I apologize, but from your perspective, what's it like experiencing the growth of parents over a 20-year cycle through their voice alone? Do you hear them, you know, aging in a way? Do you hear them, growing? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't. I would say no, but because we're all kind of aging together, and so it freaks me out that I'm as old as I am. And so I can't really say through voices. All I know is just through the bond and relationships. And like I said, I feel really grateful that I literally can call my parents my best friends. And my parents were very young when they had me and my sister, and so my parents are still obviously younger than most kids my age today. And so what's funny about the whole thing about seeing them is that they all joke that if I could see them today, I would be very disappointed with how everybody looks compared to my memory. So
Walk us through or help us understand how your fortitude has had to have been cultivated over the last 20 years, since the incident. Are you constantly, um, you know, energizing yourself? What are you doing or what are you taking in, through whatever resources you're leveraging right now, in order to keep yourself motivated, inspired? I'm sure those conversations with your parents are a big part of this, but there are also moments where you're probably alone, right? In those moments, only you can fuel yourself. So where are you getting that energy?
yeah, so the way I would sum up the past 20 years is never stop moving forward. Even in the days, the weeks, the months, the years after becoming blind, it was really, really hard on me. Not only the fact that I was blind, but I had all these other health issues related to the surgery. I mean, I had short-term memory loss for 6 months. I had to start taking all these new medications to replace what my pituitary gland should have been doing. All these different things that I was dealing with, and I compare the first couple of years as nothing more than literally pure survival. It was going through the motions, but it was always moving forward. I would literally cry myself to sleep every single night. Um, I my faith is a huge part of my life, and every single night, I would literally cry myself to sleep, praying to God that God would please let me wake up in the morning and see. Um, and yet every morning I'd wake up and I'd open my eyes and I'd see the same thing that I did when they were closed. And at that moment, I guess I had a choice is either to curl up in bed and stay there or to get out of bed and put a smile on my face and try to figure out life. That's what I did. I never stopped moving forward. I never got to go back to school the rest of my junior year. Um, Instead, I would go to my grandparents' house every morning. My mom would drop me off. My grandfather, he'd have already gone to work. And so I would just be there with my Nana. And I had teachers who came who taught me my school subjects through a program called Hospital Homebound. And I had a teacher who taught me the school subjects, another one who taught me how to read Braille and how to use a computer with talking software, and then a third teacher who taught me mobility skills, how to get around with a cane and all of that. And I was able to make it back to school for the start of my senior year, um, which I just went back for like one class a day, and the rest I did back at home with the same teachers. And eventually, end of the year, I still was able to graduate with my class, which was a big goal of mine as soon as I went blind. And I made that happen. Um, I say all that to say is that I never stopped moving forward. In the time after high school, it was still just a long period, honestly, of learning how to love life again. A lot of the time was spent honestly, it was buying time because I truly believed in all my heart that I would see again. I truly believed that either God would heal me or there would be some type of new procedure or medication, something happening somewhere in the world that would make me see again. And I literally was just buying time until that because I hated this world with every bit of my being. And it honestly took the better part of the next 10 years before I finally came to a point when I realized then that I didn't have to give up on the hope of seeing again, but I realized that it probably isn't going to be till I'm in heaven. So right now I've got more life to live. And that really was the start of a new chapter of my life. 10 years later, 2013, I had been lucky enough through a organization called Center for the Visually Impaired. I had participated in a program that they had, and at the end of the program, they set me up with internships at local businesses, whatever I was into. And I didn't really know what in the world I wanted to do with my life, but I knew I was into to travel. I loved traveling even after going blind. I think even traveling was even more important after going blind because it's all about getting to experience the world when you can't see it. And the other thing was radio, and so I literally did a about 6 month internship at a local AM radio station, as well as at a local travel agency, and those two things, they really set the stage for the future. Unbeknownst to me. And 2013, I actually opened my own home based travel agency, and that was called Better Days Travel. And I say all of this to say, to kind of answer your question, is this idea of never stop moving forward. Because for myself, even today, I have to have stuff that I am working on, that I am excited about, that I am pursuing. Because if I don't have that, and I'm just left to just sit still and sit in the here and now, that's when my mind just goes to the dark places. That's when my mind makes me get depressed about life. Um, but I always try to have something I'm working on. And so when I got to start my own travel agency and grow a business and get clients and book vacations and all of that, it was always working forward. And then 2020 happened, and the pandemic, took away the travel business from me. And that was honestly a blessing because at that point, I was doing, relatively well, but it wasn't really fulfilling me. I knew it wasn't really what I was meant to do, but I didn't know what that was. And it was through the pandemic that led me to podcasting, which has led me all the way to where I am today. But that is how I sum it up. Is literally always just keeping focus forward, always having something that I'm excited about. I feel like that's such a vital part of life that so many people miss out on is you got to have stuff you're excited about, whether it's a vacation you're planning, something you're doing tonight, or just this big project you're working towards. I feel like too many times we get caught in this idea of just going through the motions, and that's just not for me.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And, I just I'm sure you've heard this over and over again, but you're such an inspiration because there are people um, who have sight who lack perspective, and just hearing you over and over again, and you spew just such a beautiful insight into how to appreciate the little things in life when so much has been taken away. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it because your sight is a lot. You lost a lot, and so it's just beautiful hearing you speak and share your outlook. Um, I have to ask because this is a little bit of me drawing some parallels with your story. Um, this approach, this idea of moving forward every day, was this something instilled in you? Was it whether it was through your parents, through your faith? Where did it come from? Why didn't you just kind of um, call it a day after getting out of the hospital, and just basically suggesting that there was no coming back from that.
I give all the credit 110% to God. Um, God made me the man I am today because he knew what was going to happen. I am blessed in the fact that I can look back on my childhood, literally the first 17 years of my life, and I can see every single thing that happened was all preparing me for what was to come. God knew from the start. He made me super organized. He made me a kid who always wanted to try new things. I drove my poor mom crazy because this week I'm all in on rollerblading. Next month it's all in BMXing, or the next month it's surfing. I was always doing all kinds of things. I got to travel. I got to see Alaska, the Florida Keys, all these amazing things I got to do and got to try. And God instilled in me a personality that I'd rather be smiling than crying. That I want to do my best to light up the room around me. Um, because he knew that I could take what happened and I would be able to turn it into some good. I would be able to show people that you can keep going after tragedy. I believe in all my heart that is how I have done it, is because simply because of the personality and the type of person that God created me to be. Is I'm lucky enough to be a person who does view the glass as half full, and I do try to find the good, even in the midst of the bad. That's just my personality that I was blessed with, which has indeed really made it much easier to move forward, even in this world of darkness.
Hey all, it's me, Bishoy. As a marathon runner and endurance athlete, I've come to understand the importance of properly fueling your body for preparation and recovery. Every day, you get a shot at success. How you start your day typically paints a picture of what the rest of the day will look like. Start your day with a super convenient, healthy, and delicious nutritional win. Meal 1 by Creatures of Habit. Overnight oatmeal packed with 30 grams of plant-based protein, chia, flax, and pumpkin seeds. Vitamin D3, omega-3s, a probiotic, and digestive enzymes made in under 1 minute. Stop wasting time or worrying about what to eat as your first meal of the day. Start with meal 1. Visit creaturesofhabit.com, creatures spelled with a K, and use code MILE40 for 15% off a one-time purchase or the first subscription order payment. What I'm thinking is, when you come across someone who is so positively tied into their faith and finds strength in their faith, those are the kind of people that can't be broken, right? And that's what I hear in your voice, Kevin. Like, I think that if I was a little naive, I'd be like, "Hey, Kevin, was there ever an instance where you were really angry over the last 20 years? Was there ever an instance over the last 20 years where, you said, screw it, like, life is never gonna work out for me?" And And I'm not gonna ask those questions because I know how, devout you are, in the belief that even if something bad happens to you, it's kind of what's meant to be. And, regardless of the circumstance, something tells me that you approach the good and the bad with gratitude. Um, and that's a true distinguishment. And someone like that can't be broken because there's nothing you can do to break someone like that. And so, I think that's a real takeaway for the listeners out here in terms of, um, you know, understanding that if you submit yourself to that higher power, you can essentially be unbreakable. Like anyone watching this on YouTube, it's evident. Like Kevin can't see, you know? He can't see. He hasn't been able to see for 20 years now, 20 plus years. And he's got a smile on his face bigger than, you know, the majority of people that we come across on a daily basis. Um, and that speaks volumes. And so, thank you for all that insight. I want to talk a little bit more around the birth of the podcast, Great Grace and Inspiration. I can definitely take my guess as to how it came to be. Why don't you tell us a little bit more with regards to the origin, the background behind the naming, and what the vision was when you started it?
Yeah. So as I said, the podcast got started thanks to the pandemic. And so the story goes that while we were stuck in quarantine, I figured it was a perfect time for me to start the YouTube channel I had been thinking about. So I started ordering some equipment from Amazon for starting this YouTube channel. And about the time that I started getting everything in and spending too much money, um, I and all of a sudden it just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. And I thought, Kevin, if you don't have somebody here with you who can film you, you ain't going to be able to do this. And literally, it was like such an obvious thing, but it was something I hadn't really considered until all of a sudden. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. This isn't going to work. And so, of course, my kind of dreams of YouTube stardom were done. And that's when my sister was like, why don't you do a podcast? And I said, what the heck is a podcast? And she told me about it. And I said, well, Tiffany, that sounds pretty lame compared to a YouTube channel. And lo and behold, though, I started listening to podcasts. And I started to realize something really quickly once I started even listening to podcasts is it's the world of audio. And I was like, Kevin, you were designed for the world of audio. And and so I launched my podcast May of 2020. And originally it was called The Lowdown on Life and Travel, the lowdown, a play on my last name of Low. And at the time, I still thought I was going to be a travel agent. I hadn't realized that that ship had completely sailed. So the podcast literally started off talking a lot about travel. If you go back to episode 1, you'll see a lot of interviews with some awesome people all about vacations. And that was how it started. It started out, of course, I listen back to them now and I'm like, oh my gosh, those sound horrible. But at the time, I mean, it was going good. And eventually, after a short amount of time, I realized something really important in life is that a lot of times we wonder if we're traveling down the right path. And how do we know if we're on the right path or not? And I realized something really important is you know how you're on the right path? It's effortless. It's easy. As the time that I spent as a travel agent, I was constantly trying to paddle upstream, constantly trying to make it work, trying to make that career fit into who I was. When I started the podcast, I didn't know where it was going, but I knew I was on a path where I was literally floating on my back, being carried downstream without having to do any effort. And I realized then that I don't know where this is going, where it's going to lead, but I know I'm going to follow this path until I figure it out. And slowly but surely, I would rebrand the podcast two more times. So first, I rebranded it as The Lowdown with Kevin Lowe. And then eventually, it became Grit, Grace, and Inspiration as I further just kind of had the podcast evolving. That's what I think is really cool. Instead of just starting a whole new podcast, I just let it evolve. And I evolved with it. And the powerful thing is I kept having interviews with people, and I kept having so many of my guests say to me after our interview that some of the questions I asked them that people never have asked them before. Or they'd say things like, "You see parts of my story that no one else sees." Again, making me realize that the power of just the audio of Kevin being made for audio, being blind. I just realized, hey, this is indeed the thing for me.
So beautiful, man. I can just I can see it. I can see it so well. Um, and to listeners out there, be sure to check out Grit, Grace, and Inspiration as a follow up to this episode. I have a feeling that anyone that's listening to this episode is Googling your name right now. Uh, because, Kevin, like, there's just something so beautiful about all of this. Like, you have a low profile. Like, you're not some sort of big social media influencer. You have a podcast that's doing very well. And um, I love the fact that despite the fact that the odds of life may have felt like they were up against you at one point, you've taken that card and you've played it in the best possible way, and you continue to double down on yourself. And I you mean you just started the podcast 3 years ago, and I know you're only getting started right now.
Yeah,
4 years ago now. I can't believe it's 2024 already.
yeah, I
Uh,
know.
yeah, but you continue to amaze, and I know that you've parlayed the podcast into a coaching business as well.
I
So why
have.
don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So again, this kind of natural evolution is a lot of those interviews that I kept having, where after the interview, I'd have my guests, talking to me about how amazing my questions were and all that. And so many of them kept asking if I, had thought about being a coach. And kind of like podcasting, coaching was something I had no idea about. I had only ever heard of a PE coach. And in school, I never really liked my PE coaches. And so then I found out about the realm of coaching, of life coaching. And again, this natural evolution, I realized that on the podcast, I can inspire. In my coaching, I can empower. And like the podcast, the coaching has evolved. It kind of keeps evolving of exactly who I help, what I do, and basically today it's narrowed down to my person that I work with the most are women who have undergone some type of life changing event in their life, and the life that they had before no longer seems to fit them. Um, they're not sure what they want to do, but they just know that having gone through what they did, they know that they're made for more. They want to figure out, why am I here? What's my reason why? What is my purpose? And that's where I get to come into play and get to help that woman figure out exactly what her purpose is and then get to design her life around that purpose.
Are there any resources that you've leveraged over the years aside from your faith? Are there any books that you've listened to, or any other sort of outlets that have played a role in helping you navigate some of these conversations?
Um, not I can't speak to any specific book for like coaching in general. But I will just mention one book because it was so monumental in my life. And it was a book about the guy Eric Weinmayer. He is completely blind, and he was, I believe, the first blind person to ever summit Mount Everest. And he did a kayaking trip down the Grand Canyon, and he wrote a book about both experiences. And I had read his book about kayaking down the Grand Canyon. And at the end of the book, it was the his guide who had guided him down the river. And it was this last scene of the book with the guide. And his guide had walked out into the river. They were all getting ready, packing up, loading onto the van after this like 2 week long trip. And the guy stood out in the middle of the river facing upstream, and he had his arms outstretched, his fingers splayed, just letting the current run through his fingers. And he said the thing that changed my life is he said, I'll be back someday, but for now I've got more life to live. When he said that, talking about the river, that was me talking about life. And that has had the most profound impact, getting me to where I am today.
That's beautiful. Wow. Um, the I had lots of those moments last week when we connected,
Yeah.
right? Uh, you continue to blow me away, Kevin, and in such a positive way. And I really want to soak it all in just speaking to you and listening to you and gaining insight from you. Um, the world has so much to learn from you, from your outlook, from your commitment to moving forward, um, for your refusal to turn away, and for the example that you're setting, not just for those closest to you, but those who are in your periphery, who can maybe look at you and think, "Oh, that person's got it rough," but little do they know that you've got it good. You've got it pretty good, my friend. And it speaks volumes to what you have going on the inside. Um, and of course.
And if
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
could, I would love to share one quick thing. When you asked me earlier about what has kept me moving forward, and I talked about my faith, there was one other thing that I failed to mention that, if you wouldn't mind, I would love to share with you. So at the same time that I was in the hospital with my brain tumor, there was another boy my same age with literally the same brain tumor. His name was John. And here you have these two kids, same age, same tumor, this rare type of tumor. And at the end of the day, John did not get to come home from the hospital. Um, my mom uh, would stay in touch a little bit with his mother, and I remember on my 14th anniversary of when I had went blind, I was able through Facebook to find John's mom, and I got to meet her. I didn't know she would want to meet me, um, but I was grateful that she did. And John is somebody who I never met, but yet I can't help sometimes but think that I get to live for us both. Um, if some days are maybe a little bit hard, I have to think that, yeah, but I got somebody else on my back. Somebody else who didn't get to come home, who didn't get to become best friends with his parents, who didn't get to be here 20 years later. And for myself, I always just kind of keep that in the back of my mind, um, remembering how close my family was to losing me, how close I was to having all this be over. And that's been a really powerful impact on this journey as well. That I just wanted to be sure that I mentioned it.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's just another reminder, like we can go through life and we can forget those moments, those experiences, those those things that happen along our journey, which show us how lucky we got and how others unfortunately had misfortune. You know, a lot of times we go through life and we think that we are responsible for all our successes, or we are responsible for all the good things that happen to us. And we don't realize that things like that happen where other people are doing other things right in their life, and there are things that are out of their control, and then all of a sudden their circumstances get flipped upside down, similar to yours and John's, and in different respects as well. You know, like you didn't do anything to get your circumstances, and neither did he, unfortunately. And a lot of times we take that for granted as we go through life, and we forget the fact that, you know, there's an element of this that was out of our control. And so, by speaking to that, you really highlight something that I think we need to be reminded of consistently. And thank you for bringing that up. That's a really tough story to transition from, but I'm gonna try. I wanna spend the last couple minutes here, just gaining as much perspective and insight from you. Um, you talk about the fact that a lot of your clientele is female based. How did you how did let me just go take a step back really quick. How did you even start the business? Was it, people who had heard you through the podcast, like you said, who eventually became clients? Or did you start, marketing it and getting clients that way?
Yeah. Fortunately, having the podcast, yeah, that was kind of like the open gate. It's an amazing way for people to get to know me. One on one every week in their ears while they're doing life, and then yeah, and then people coming from the podcast into the coaching business.
Got it, got it. And obviously, without getting specific into individual people, can you talk to us about some of those transitions you had mentioned earlier? You had mentioned that, a lot of the female clients of yours are going through life phases, that require transition. Are you talking about, like, for instance, like divorces, relationship type transitions? Are you talking about career transition? Are you talking about other sorts of transitions?
Yeah, it seems like most of the people who I have worked with, have had some type of typically type of medical. Maybe it was breast cancer, maybe it was some type of tragic event. Um, and I mean, it could be something like divorce, it could be something like bankruptcy, something that has just totally flipped life, on its head, and then helping, that woman to just kind of regain perspective and regain footing, and understanding that life on the other side of a traumatic event, um, we sometimes get a choice on how we want it to be. You could say that on the other side of me becoming blind, I had a choice of what to do with it. And I feel like the sooner that we can harness the power of the hardest thing that we've been through, the sooner that we can harness that power, the sooner we can get to use it for our own good. And that's what I try to cultivate, to try and help this person do, is figure out what was it that they gained through that hard experience that has made them realize that they're made for more today.
Would you agree with me that it's harder to harness that power to make that decision to move forward positively, as opposed to the issues that come about afterwards, right? Let's say um, you had your journey. You find out you were blind. You had to deal and grapple with the fact that, okay, I have two choices now. I either am going to embrace this, I'm going to make the best of this, I'm going to keep moving forward, I'm going to live the strongest, most impactful life going forward, right? That's a
Yeah.
very hard decision.
Yeah.
But then you start living that life and you might be met with rebuke. You might be met with judgment. You might be met with rejection. You might be met with, oh, he'll never, or oh, he can't, or he won't, or his story's already written, so there's no way that he can change the ending, right? And I imagine that your clients have to deal with a similar situation where a lot of times you need to realize that the first choice, that commitment to owning the writing of those remaining chapters, is harder than dealing with that rejection, that rebuke, so on and so forth. Do you agree that first step is the hardest?
Yeah. Oh, I agree 100%. Yeah.
And how do you articulate that to clients?
Oh my goodness. It's different for everybody, but I think that the biggest part is helping my client walk through a process of figuring out their life's purpose. Because I feel like once we can understand why we're here, why we've gone through what we did, then it kind of makes all the other stuff a little bit easier to deal with because we understand why we're here. We have a mission, we have a purpose. And when you have a mission, a purpose, well, it kind of makes you unstoppable. And that is the biggest thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Once you have that center, once you have that thing that
Yes.
your eye is on, right?
Yep.
You can't you won't be deterred, right? Like you anticipate that rejection, that rebuke. Like it's part of the process. And I think that that's something that is a theme that comes up over and over again on this podcast. But I think it's really important to hear it on this particular episode because what we're dealing with on this particular episode is everyday people dealing with everyday problems, and they are going to you who you had a circumstance that, to your point, only 1%, right? You said
Yep.
1% of
Yep.
people
Yeah.
uh, it could have come out with regards to the surgery. Not to mention, it was the last side effect that your doctor mentioned to you,
Yep.
uh, right? And so you didn't see this coming. And you're the perfect person for people to lean on with regards to how to approach um, an outlook and building perspective in the wake of adverse circumstances. Kevin, as we wrap things up here today, I don't think there's like a one thing you could leave us with kind of statement because there really isn't. I could literally talk to you for hours, and we're gonna talk once this recording's done. But um, given all the work that you've done now over the last 4 years, and given how you've seen not only your personal development, but how you've seen your continued ability to approach the different circumstances that clients are coming with, and leaning on you for help with, what have you learned about yourself the most over the last 4 years?
Oh man. Um about myself, I think the biggest thing is I think all of us we don't think that we could do it. Um Probably you listening to me today say to yourself, wow, I couldn't do what he did. There's no way. After becoming blind and continuing to move forward, I couldn't do it. But the fact is true is that we're all so much more amazing, more resilient than we ever can imagine.
Mm,
If you get thrown into the pool, you're going to learn how to swim. And it's the same thing with this. And I feel like everything for myself, it's kind of like when I look back on life and I've thought before, if I could go back and I could talk to my 17-year-old self, be there in the hospital with him the night before surgery. what would I say to that 17-year-old self? And I think the biggest thing I would say is you can do it. That life is hard. Every day is a challenge. But when you have your center, when you have your faith, your family, your hope, your desire, and your understanding that it's going to get better, that the dark times, the hard times, they're not forever. You're traveling through it, and soon you will learn how to love life again.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing for myself is that I've learned about myself is this idea of being resilient, of being understanding of how I continue to be able to harness what should be considered a bad thing, but I flip it around and use it for my good, which at the end of the day has you think, was it really ever bad in the first place?
Yeah. Something tells me that if given the choice, you wouldn't you wouldn't go back and change the way life played out for you.
I am thankful that I don't get that choice. Because it's easy to say that if we are given the choice, do you want to have to go through hard times in life? We'd say nope. But if you ask somebody what has made you the person you are today, they'll most likely say, well, it's this hard thing I've went through, this I've gone through. And so if we didn't go through the challenges, well, then maybe we'd be a really lame person. And I then therefore think it all has a purpose. But I'm glad that I don't have to choose.
I agree with you 100%, my friend. I think that a lot of times it's those challenges which, not only help us find and cultivate that purpose. It's those challenges that, you know, dare us to do greater. I think that when I think about the subtitle of my first book, it was How Setbacks Can Dare You Rather Than Define You. I don't think you're defined by the fact that you can't see. I think what it's done to you over the last couple of years is it's dared you to make a greater impact, right? It dared you to take life and turn it into something beautiful, and to find light in the midst of darkness, literally. And um, yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly with regards to that. And I think that that's something that to the listeners out there, if you aren't living a life with challenges, if you aren't living a life, if you're living on cruise control, you know, take a step back and understand that it's only through difficult moments where you can build that grounding, and start to build that mindset of understanding. Because I'll say it over and over again. Kevin's one of the happiest guests that I've ever had on the show. Uh, and I know there's a lot of people out there who couldn't even come close to understanding what it is that you're dealing with. And it speaks volumes to you. And so to round things out, Kevin, I want to say thank you. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for giving me the time, gracing us with your outlook, empowering us, just showing us that, you could take the hand that you've been dealt and really turn it into something special if you want to, right? And if you lean into that purpose driven mentality. So thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, man. It means the world to be here and to get to share my story. I've always said if I can maybe help somebody to make their life a little bit easier by sharing my story, then I have to believe that all that I've been through has been worth it.